Right, welcome over to another reaction to Force 13 animations. It's a bit dark on this angle, but that's the best I got right now. But this is a highly requested animation. This is the 2023 Pacific Typhoon season animation, and any more ones on request will be added and they'll be on the reaction list. So without further ado, let's go.
It's only 40 more seconds until the new year begins. And after another
Dramatic
in the northern hemisphere
setting before the actual season.
in the Atlantic, in the eastern Pacific, the year comes to
You can see the Sims background, the little icons, not icons, the lines, the drawn lines, the close geostationary satellite.
So everyone counted.
Do you actually do these? Now I'm curious if you guys actually do a countdown like this. It is a very cool moment though, like no surprise there, but it is.
But wait, we're forgetting something. The Western Pacific.
You could hear click in the background. Someone clicked. I think it didn't get edited out.
Along with its previous 2 years, it had below average activity. Yet, the destruction...
The 2021 season was below average. Again, some significant typhoons. Not all too memorable though. People do forget it. And same with 2022. Some several significant typhoons, but again, not too well remembered. But of course, there are big significant systems within the seasons, and they still do get forgotten. But 2021 is actually somewhat decently remembered, but like 2022 is not remembered as nearly as much. But of course, like Tropical Storm Beggy for me is one of the most significant ones that season. Of course, you had Hinnom Nor, and then you had Nanon Nor as well. But yeah, I mean, it's some systems really lift it up as well. Also, you had Noru as well. I actually forget about Noru quite a lot, but that's interesting.
Still remained. Many countries were still affected that year. Amongst a few, the Philippines, Vietnam.
But yeah, I mean, I forgot that pivot on the same point. Those two seasons were below average there. So the average season in Western Pacific, unlike the basins, is some of the highest averages on record. In globally basin-wide, you can see the density of the distribution of tropical cyclone tracks compared to every other basin. It's just a giant swath, really, because the activity is so high. There is an average of an average alone is something around 27, which is interesting because that's what last year's season was roughly. That's why it's classified as like an average season, which is the first sort of average season in many years. Really, 2019 was the true last above average season. 30 sort of considered that near average as well, but that's what I think that's the true of above average 30. And then but the thing with tropical cyclones is that's the named tropical cyclones. In these seasons, you have a lot of unnamed tropical cyclones and just other designations, and as a result, you get actually a very much higher distribution of just overall tropical cyclones in the season. Like 2019 had around close to 30 tropical cyclones like named, but the actual unnamed was around between 47, something as high as that, 47 tropical cyclones. So like you have much more active seasons like 1964, which had the most tropical cyclones on record. They had about 38 named storms, and it had well over 50, almost, it had 50 something, pushing 60, like a ridiculous number of tropical cyclones in the season. It's just like unheard of. Literally, that's double the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season, which was 13 named, and that's just named. Of course, there might have been maybe an unnamed in the 2020 season. I can't remember if that's true, but it's just so high. The eighth is obviously typically pushing above 200 as well. This season's forecast is over 400 potentially.
Japan, and South Korea. Out of those, the Philippines received devastating hits by Typhoon Noru.
Okay, they're giving us a reminder.
Korea was hit
So Noru, but Hinnom.
impactful Hinnom Nor.
It's a good reciting. I don't quite remember them exactly.
Will the 2023
It's hard to pack everything in the brain and recognize that. But yeah, South Korea was significantly impacted by Hinnom Nor.
season be just as inactive as the last few years? Will we have another
A
season?
really interesting season. Like, this season truly was very interesting,
Find
and it got me kicked into actually tracking tropical cyclones. This season did, really like live tracking them, and
And now,
seeing this season was incredible in real time. A Mang in early April. What really fascinates me is the Philippine names, because those ones that go by my head sometimes, and so it's good to try to hold on to the Philippine names and try to remember those seasonal names as well, rather than the international names. But Amang was mid-April tropical depression in the sort of PR region where you would sort of expect for an April tropical cyclone, come to show really how anomalous Sinlaku is. I love this track as well. Sanvu. I think Sanvu had previously some more significant tropical cyclone intensity, but far east near Chup microstate, Micronesia, and it's moving towards. Well, it's already weakened. It's still late April though. 2 tropical cyclones. No really. So we've got 1.63 accumulated ace from this tropical cyclone. I see there's an ace bar here. 60 miles per hour, so 50 knots. That is best to use knots for tropical cyclones. With low pressure area here, an LPA, tropical low even, and this is Mawar. So this is May. I mean, this is interesting because I remember this is the true tropical cyclone where I really started remembering, like, when I really got into tracking tropical cyclones. Mawar was just intensifying. Like I saw it like many news, different points everywhere. I saw that Mawar approaching Guam, high intensity. Like, just reading these sort of articles constantly, and then you see like the F-13s, like little short bulletins and stuff. They had like the tropical weather bulletins of like 185 miles per hour, etc. When it's approaching, as intensification has really grabbed your attention. That's what grabs a lot of people's attention really with tropical cyclones, is these high intensity magnificent tropical cyclones that do exist, and magnificent. But 185 miles per hour, 160 knots, but it's really just the way the tropical cyclones just there's a timing of it, and it really got me interested. And because I saw the bulletins, so you had like on approach you had a weakening tropical cyclone and then re-intensified, and it sustained itself, and then the story really started cutting down after it moved past Guam, because the main story was about Guam. The impact's obviously very significant, but that's just my anecdotal point of my Mawar, the first true tracking of a tropical cyclone. And look at this. This is the Zahara imagery of infrared satellite, and you can see this textbook. This is intensification approaching Guam. You can see the darker yellow, about minus 85. Yellow is about minus 80, minus 75, etc. And then you reach minus 50, etc. But the well-defined CDO here, you still got some inconsistencies within the CDO, but that's just an intensification cycle. You've got the open eye present here, which is, if you look at it from a Dvorak structure-based pattern, this is going to be an eye seam type pattern, which suggests the eye is the predominant now structure, which the Dvorak is highlighting, that demonstrates the intensification, the structural change, the point in which tropical cycles life. This is now a dominant phase towards intensity, is this eye, and that's what's changing the way the Dvorak's recording not only the intensification rate, so if you've got Sims, for example, they source tropical cyclone data, you can see how it has intensification for T value per 24 hours. You have tropical cyclone intensity of ADT, which will then obviously provide the updates of T7, which is going to be around that sort of category 5 threshold, around 140 knots pushing, and then this tropical cyclone here is clearly towards approaching 140 knots and intensifying. Still, obviously, this is axisymmetric. There's a coherent vortex. You've got the clear CDO structure, but the convection is not necessarily symmetric around the entire circulation yet. But you can also see that the outflow, the way the little cirrus bands on the top left and bottom right, there's 2 of them. That's the dual outflow channel. That's a healthy indicator this tropical cyclone is benefiting from divergence aloft, which is above 500 millibars, and it's moving towards the pole, and it's basically going around cyclonically and outwards, almost like an S-shaped pattern. And also you get to see sometimes in these loops, it's going to be hard to see here, an anticyclone structure around the tropical cyclone, which is aloft, which demonstrates the modulation, the intensity of tropical cyclone, the way it's able to affect the shear, modulate the shear, and it's able to control its own environment. And that's also one of the big stories about Beryl and why the shear forecast completely flopped in the Central Caribbean with Beryl. But of course, that was a Category 5 as well. But here, you would be able to tell in a loop as well. You can just see how this moves due northerly. There's some shear as well in the southeast. We got a camera here. This is the Guam camera.
The potential to be extremely powerful, and we're witnessing a storm that is about
So,
to realize this.
4.3 billion. I really don't really get how it works, because like NCI, you have different types of things that measure the damages, but sometimes they just change the values, etc. But 4.3 billion is an actual measured value of the damages. But obviously, like with last season, the 2025 Atlantic was 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. They really changed the initial values months after the true damages, and that's one of the things which makes it confusing with the damages, because they just change it. But here, this is when peak intensity of Mawar is actually approaching May 25th, around the late 23Z onwards. It weakens, approaches the Philippines actually, and it should be recurving this, if that serves memory. But yeah, so these tropical cyclones are moving westwards and then due northerly. That's just fascinating tropical cyclones. JWC actually upgraded in their final bulletins. Obviously, they're not publishing bulletins anymore on tropical cyclones, but I don't think the upgrade was really necessarily warranted. I think the fact that this analysis of 160 knots is perfectly fitting. But now we have Cheding Guchol in the early June period, and it's intensifying tropical cyclone. It's interesting to obviously note that the very low number is obviously very apparent at this point. It's June, there's only been 3 tropical cyclones, one really intense one, which is really, like, because it's an El Nino season, you're going to have these sort of tropical cyclones that form out here. It's actually quite similar to Sinlaku, but it's just a singular tropical cyclone, and also it's also actually not that far forming east, so it's not really any sort of super demonstrative state of the El Nino. But we know the 2023 season had this huge pocket of oceanic heat content, very favorable isotherms. The pattern was there. It's just a matter of tropical cyclones that formed early June, and so they're still progressing at this point. It's not really truly developed at this point, so it's just one partial state. You obviously have other forcing, like the IOD, which actually became more pronounced and actually more influential as the season gone on. It became highly positive through the season. Actually, one of the highest since 2019. It was the values, but this is just interesting to note because El Nino is not the main modulation here, but the season still is below average, and I wouldn't put any stock of this being related to Tonga eruption. But yeah, it's Guchol now intensifying tropical cyclone. It weakens as well mid-June period, and it's recurving away from Japan nearly. Makes that, it's actually the island there, which I cannot read what it says. Yeah, I cannot read the island, it's just not zoomed in enough. And kind of a lull in the period here. Now it's kind of mid-July, where you got to see a PR near tropical cyclone. The edge, the low pressure area right towards the Luzon region, Dodong. And this is Talim, which I also do remember tracking as well. Rapidly intensifying, Category 2 intensity, tropical cyclone. I mean, this season really was a gem in terms of the Force 13 tropical weather bulletin forecast. So very actually useful around this time, popularized as well. But yeah, just great service around this time. But the is it Ege? Because I don't quite remember how the Philippines pronounce it, but Doksuri, the international name, and gigantic tropical cyclone that you can see there, the size of it. That's the International Space Station image as well. The tropical cyclone right there.
Looking at the Japan Meteorological Agency's forecast cone, they're actually forecasting a pressure.
It's interesting to see the perspective of JMA forecast, as if we're there in a moment, which is, I really like that, because if you've seen my documentary, I like to give plugins, but documentary I had of Typhoon Mawar was trying to be in a real-time type of perspective. You see a lot of tornado videos that do real-time perspective. I try to do it with a typhoon sequence with Mawar, but this JMA forecast here of Doksuri is almost like that in real time.
When it makes landfall in mainland China, will only be a severe tropical storm, not even a typhoon.
Well, Pegasi were running with that.
One of the biggest flops in the forecast.
WC forecast, they're expecting
90 mile an hour. Doksuri has continued.
But none of the models saw it. The agencies didn't support it either as an intensity.
In central Taiwan or even southern Taiwan, and it likewise it could also do so on the southern end and go into Luzon. And of course, if this storm does make a Philippine landfall, then this.
The thing is, Philippine landfall is, it's so obvious when you see a tropical cyclone that's moving due westerly approaching Luzon. When a tropical cyclone, you see parallel in the coast, and you see this even just a partial northerly vector, and you can see it with the convective banding when the tropical cyclone is moving northwards rather than it's moving westwards. There's a difference in the convective banding. One of the leading figures with tropical cyclones that have a northwestward motion approaching PER is the convective banding ahead of the tropical cyclone. The PRE, the predecessor rainfall events, the tropical cyclone banding, you can also almost tell that the westward motion of the outer banding and the fringes of the outer CDO, and the demonstration of that flow around it, especially if you look at the visible imagery. You can see the little streamline like sort of flow of the cumulus, even the shear. You can tell the motion just by the way the tropical cyclone is demonstrating. Sometimes it's a lot harder to do that, but it is clear, and that in the sea can tell you, especially when it's like near Luzon, if it's moving just due northerly. Very rarely will you see a tropical cyclone that goes due northerly, then put that westwards track. It's just not really a type of synoptic forcing that can actually allow tropical cyclone to make that sort of westerly motion. The sting of the examples, there are very few that you can think of in that such regard. Obviously, you have some example, one that may appear later, which some sort of resembles it later in this season. But yeah, I mean, Hong Kong was in the forecast. Babian Islands, Single 3, Cagayan, Isabella, and Apia. It's interesting. Almost category 5. It was a very large tropical cyclone, and it moved towards the Babuan Islands, obviously the strait, and it becomes major category 3, which is completely against the forecasts. This is actually pretty sharp. It's probably one of the more Otis-like cases we have of a complete flop, and this is congruency as well between different forecasts. I'm not sure what the CMA forecast is, because the CMA might have been slightly different to this, but the other models and the agencies do not pick up on this. But it does move into the Southern China region, which is at least a good more forecast on the modeling. Like for me, in my perspective, is the ICON model, the tropical cyclone tracks that it demonstrates. It's been consistent and reliably over a long period of time that I've been observing it. The averages in the tracks is pretty close in many situations to the observed tracks, and this sort of sort of collection, and also my recollection of what I was trying to say, is that the model clearly has an understanding of what tropical cyclone track is supposed to be. It understands the synoptics, but now we have ensembles like the GenCast FM3, which obviously tell us much better now, which would have helped in this instance. But clearly, the models that did tell that was going to move towards Southern China is good that they were there, but those may be owned also to the GFS and ECMWF, which can also produce some better forecasts. But the most reliable I've just tended to see is the ICON. Obviously not necessarily for intensity, but for the tracks. But we Kanun at this point, category 4 intensity tropical cyclone, another significant tropical cyclone. Not many tropical cyclones again so far, pretty bare bones. Only we're not seeing a lot of trailing. We're not seeing like any sort of phase. It's not very El Nino like supporting phases. Like you're not seeing any tropical waves behind it. You're only seeing one significant tropical cyclone after another. We've seen Mawar, you see the next one. We're seeing Talim, you see another one. You see Doksuri, you're now seeing Kunun. It's one tropical cyclone, but they're all reaching high intensity, different location points, and these little gridded points where they track through different sea surface temperatures that have been untapped through the season in very high oceanic heat content, very significant actually in the season, but also the sea surface temperature isotopes very warm to the northerly. You can just see these intensification cycles, but it's just really interesting how there's only just one tropical cyclone at a time. (2023) was really interesting in the way that the Atlantic was really outperforming its El Nino forecast, whilst the Western Pacific was really underperforming its El Nino forecast. And obviously the Eastern Pacific really just went to forecast, and more than that, it went to and way more like 2018, but 2018 was actually not forecasted to be as extreme as it was, like nowhere near, which is really interesting. Kunun became a significant tropical cyclone, but now we see dual tropical cyclones finally. But there's obviously dissipation of Kunun now, but we see land at a high latitude, the monsoon trough in the northerly regions, the vorticity around perhaps even the Mayu front. But the monsoon troughs retreat, they move more towards the southerly latitudes, towards the sort of mid latitude between, just basically an intermediate between. If you just take the latitude of Taiwan and you put it up north, that's where the monsoon trough around this time retreats southwards. This dip in this vorticity that is consistent with these sort of averages in climatology, but around this mid-August time frame, you see these high latitude cyclones forming, and even strong ones, especially in current seasons, like more modern seasons. Like you even have research from the Imperial College which demonstrates that climate change is actually benefiting these isosystems to move more northwards and be higher values, which is why you're seeing intense tropical cyclones. Especially in the recent years, you're seeing a lot of them are coming category 4 intensity a lot more easier. And just look at Lan, Shan, you have Ampil, like many cases, but Lan becomes a significant category 4 typhoon and becomes category 1 landfall in the Shikoku region near Osaka, Zuran. You see Dora, which is the tropical cyclone of a lifetime, really. Greater than John in really its sort of track. You could say that. I mean, I think it's true because it traversed the entire Atlantic, it traversed the entire Eastern Pacific, the Central Pacific, it's in the Western Pacific. If it moved due westerly into the Western Pacific, somehow managed to get its way into the Indian Ocean, there would have been. I mean, it was that far away, but it was also that far away at the same time to where it completed a tropical cyclone track. It just straight up technically crossed the globe. And it made a circumference around the globe, which is incredible to think of already what this tropical cyclone has been able to do. Dora retired, of course, by its significant indirect influences as well. But nonetheless, it's interesting. We do actually have a current tropical cyclone as well, Lala, which may approach the international date line as well. But this is the tropical cyclone I was talking about. So we see Damre. I actually don't quite remember Damre, but Damre was a typhoon. But this is the point, Saola. I remember tracking this intensification of tropical cyclone. Really, it just looked like a category 1 typhoon exploded into a category 4 typhoon, moving south. It's a very erratic track. This is probably one of the more erratic tracks you'll ever see, or PER, just tropical cyclone in general. Is southward moving towards Luzon, intensifying tropical cyclone, and this is one of those situations, as I was saying, you actually cannot tell about its motion. You cannot tell it's moving westerly. It's actually moving southerly, and it's now moving back north, making a loop, and it rapidly intensifies, puts us in the PR region, favourable ocean heat content values. There's no continental waters. Actually, typically they have a lowered sea surface temperature. They've lowered the ocean heat content values because they're right towards continental waters. But the Philippine region is unique geography where that's not necessarily the case. And you can see intensification rapidly becomes category 3, moves northerly, loops towards the FBR region. So, and look at that textbook structure. And I'm glad they have the infrared, but it's moving towards near the Babuyan Islands again, Batanes, and you can see it's also referred to as Goreng, but Goreng, Saola, rapidly intensifies. Textbook donut ring shape to its category 5. You can see some pinks, so this is sort of reaching that sort of pink ring structure, but still minus 79, 70, between 77 and 79 degrees Celsius average CB heights of the entire CDO, and that's supportive easily above T7. I mean, you're pushing between D7 and T7.5 in this type of donut structure with a very large defined eye, probably 45 miles wide, maybe something like that. Probably is quite large. Maybe not. Maybe between 35 and 45 miles, nautical miles. But you can also see that it's moving sort of westward. This is the thing I was talking about. So you can tell it's moving westerly now with this sort of banding. You can see the shape of the banding, the way the banding is also forming these CBs, and it's westward shaped ring, almost like a ring-like semi sort of a circle shape. You can tell by that sort of structure and the shear of the east side of the outer CDO, the way it's getting sheared apart. You have this sort of remnants of the convection, this decay of the outer CDO, which actually previously was the CDO. You can tell the way that looks, that is actually a westward moving tropical cyclone. Maybe it's just not, because it's not theory, it's not like actual literature, it's just infrared based detections that allow you to determine subtle things, especially in the absence of strong data sets. I think that's the main point to get away with. But it's the category 5 textbook cyclone that becomes around 450 knots, which is more than what the JWC had for the longest time. They didn't even have it as a category 5 tropical cyclone, which is ridiculous. And they upgraded it in their final bulletin to 140 knots. But I still don't think that's enough. 150 knots, I think, is perfectly valid, which is the congruency with the F-13 analysis as well. Signal 5 warnings as well. Northeastern Babuyan. Signal for Batanes. Northeastern Babuyan. Santa Ana. Cagayan. Ilocos Norte. It's interesting that. Almost category 5, it's really just threaded the needle. In fact, I wonder if it actually made any direct hit, because it really moved towards the strait, like it got really quite close. But it became category 2 and then weakened. Haikui now, so you can see a couple of tropical cyclones now in this sort of wave activity. But yeah, tropical cyclones that formed from this sort of monsoon trough region of vorticity, and it's still not really an El Niño's type of pattern here. Like, there's a lot of impacts on a lot of tropical cyclone based impacts so far in this season, and a lot of the tropical cyclones have not formed that east as they would typically be as sort of like El Niño projected. You get decently northerly latitude tropical cyclones that move in due westerly, forming climatology that almost matches so seasons that have like ends in neutral and even some sort of La Nina state. Like, nothing's really telling about that. But Haikui, category 4 tropical cyclone, I think so. Yun Yung and Kurogi Fujiwara, which is interesting. It's category 3 Haikui, and that's category 3 and by their analysis, which is interesting. I mean, category 3, category 4 is pretty close, but category 3 is a reasonable intensity estimate right then. But we got first South China Sea forming tropical cyclone in late September in this time frame, moving westwards towards the Vietnam region. Late forming tropical cyclone 13W did not get named actually. The case in many Western Pacific tropical cyclone, many seasons Western Pacific, it does actually skew the data when it comes to naming tropical cyclones and having the names of average seasons, because some seasons may just about reach that point, but also you can sort of negate them as well, because at the same time they're not necessarily, because there's just a massive difference anyways. The difference between names and the overall season is just high anyways. It'll change the entire averages.
So here is Koinu approaching the southern tip of Taiwan. That was a category 4 typhoon with a position
Koinu as well, category 4. Comes category 3, becomes category 4. Majors, almost category 4. I think that might be category 4. Southern region of Taiwan. which is interesting because obviously slightly flatter terrain, not as nearly as mountains, flow disruptions. We don't see any sort of loops in the thing, and the forecast now is interesting as well. Moving westerly, paralleling the coast and weakening. This is like one of the strangest bulletins. I remember also hearing about this one. It's one of the strange bulletins. Paralleling major tropical cyclone that just weakens paralleling. Like how sort of like eerie is that as a if you're from Hong Kong, for example, just no expectation of landfall, but do you trust that? Because you're seeing a major tropical cyclone just offshore, paralleling the coast, and it actually does follow to forecast, which is very impressive forecasting.
Landfalls in the side of China.
And it does parallel and does weaken, as depicted. It does get awfully close though, but it does weaken. Bolivan now as well. This is the peak sort of climatology I consider, with October, November being so prolific, but Bolivan with one of the more El Nino states, and at this point El Nino is much more defined as well. But the recurving far easterly tropical cyclone becomes textbook with its structure, and absolutely textbook. We get a perfect pink ring, which is minus 80 degrees Celsius, not completely around the tropical cyclone, but you see this defined pink ring sections around the southern, the northeastern quadrants, and you see this perfect, like sort of ball shape. That's what I like to call a T7 state above for Dvorak structures, like this ball shape for the structure. I just name different states because you got like shrimp state, which is Typhoon. You got a different spike ball sort of shape, which is like category 4 intensity. Different things like hammer, almost like a hammer shape. It's just different names to define, but I think you got to define them some way in order to make sure you know what the tropical cyclone intensity is. But yeah, interesting. It intensifies 165 knots in Bolivan. Recurves as well. It becomes, look at that track, the length of the category 5, 165 knots is awfully long. Huge ace making for the season. Still 278 ace in the season. I was saying 200 earlier, which is actually incorrect because that's actually below average. It's actually above 300, which is like more than 300, not just 300, but more than that to become the equivalent to what is an average season, which is incredible, just as a matter of fact, for just any basin wine, but West Pacific, yeah. I mean, it's just a full season that technically could exist the entire year. 17W in very southerly latitudes, probably 4 degrees north in the November period, not favourable really at all in the PAR region. Interesting, because that means a lot of westerly flow is imparting shear on the structure of the vortex. You can see this sort of hostility. It's just like this huge, almost wave turn. At this point, the monsoon's kicking up as well, so you just see this huge pull of 850 millibar to 200 millibar mean flow, which is just due westerly across the entire Philippine mainland. It's a huge density, and it corresponds to the monsoon-like state in which the precipitation actually becomes more significant than the tropical cyclones at this point. They get huge flash flooding events corresponding to this, but also the coupling of that is really bad as well. We saw it last year with Kalmeki, but now Kabiyan is in December, mid-December. Southern Luzon, actually, southern Luzon rather than not Luzon, southern Mindanao rather than northern Mindanao. Jelawat reminds me of Pabuk in 2019, moving towards the Riau Islands as a remnant low. Actually, the same sort of region was impacted by Senya as well, which was a tropical depression-like state at that point. But yeah, despite El Nino past 2020 below average, the 4th consecutive season. So yeah, we're talking already as I was saying 2019, but only 18 named storms, and that's also including Dora as well. Well, there were obviously more tropical cyclones overall. There's probably about 34 overall, as maybe something like around 34 overall probably. But yeah, the 3rd most inactive season on record, which is an incredible stat for an El Nino state. But textbook loop here of Mawar, obviously very damaging. Doc Suri as well, textbook loop here just fascinating to look at. I see Bolivar, this is the textbook stretch. We don't really get to see anything about Bolivar, but you can see this textbook stretch. I mean, these tropical cyclones, actually it looks even better than Surrey. The small-eyed tropical cyclones have this much more contraction, and you can see in the microwave these small rings around the tropical cyclone and the spiral banding around that one. And you can see the satellite which corresponds directly to that. You can see this pinwheel effect with the mesovortices, the perfect eye wall gradient, not even anything shaded out. A smooth CDO, you can see the little wrinkles, like the gravity waves which have been propagating outwards from the tropical cyclone. Sometimes you get like standing waves, which is almost a steady state of the tropical cyclones because you don't see them in intensification like this. This is more robust. And you can see the way the wrinkle-like shape is around the inner CDO and the outer CDO, which is more cirrused out with a more sort of smooth look around it. But textbook, and you can also see the spiral banding out ahead of the tropical cyclone as well. But yeah, just classic significant tropical cyclone and 165 knots, which is a very significant intensity as well. But yeah, 897 millibars for Mawar. I really like this sort of look to this. Look at the little rain color effect. I think this is the best they've ever projected this sort of like summary to look. But it's Salvador as well, 906 millibars. It's actually high pressure relatively for the tropical cyclone being at 150 knots. Because if you look at other tropical cyclones, they typically approach 900 millibars or less in 150 knots in the Western Pacific. So different sort of relationships you can get, but like Bolivar as well, 190 miles per hour, 165 knots with 894 millibars, which isn't actually necessarily that low of a pressure for the fact that it's 160 knots in the Western Pacific. And then we got the other tropical cyclone. 17W was just designated here as a low pressure area, which probably could have been a tropical depression state as well, but depends. Probably monsoon like. But if you do category 4 landfalls, not necessarily in much significant tropical cyclone impacts either, which is interesting because in any other basin this would be considered very significant, but in the Western Pacific this is not necessarily as significant as the climatology and just seasonal analysis. You can see the third most inactive season, and it does really demonstrate in the data here. But yeah, still extremely damaging, and this is actually preliminary. This was 15.5, and that was actually Ege, which is Doksuri, is the most costly tropical cyclone in the Western Pacific at 28 billion, and it's retired. Obviously, Mawar's 4.3 billion, so very significant damage. There's still in a season that lacks had extreme amount of damage. Like, I mean, just extreme. There's no other word to put to it of any other season really, and it does put it up there as one of the most costly seasons. I think 2019 might be still up there with 2013 as well, but it's still quite significant as well with the impacts of Doksuri. I mean, it's really main significant impact. 280 days, fourth consecutive, but we've seen that one, and it's the fourth costliest. It says fourth costliest. I think this is probably going to be higher than that. It might even be second, but one strongest in May, which is definitely, I think that might be the case because Mawar, which is 160 knots, second costliest on record. Again, we know that one's changed, but we see the costliest on record, Doksuri in China, which is really the flooding, but also the significant landfall impact. That Guangzhou region, I have been putting in so many different times mentioned about it, but it's just really prone. But the flooding also inland is very significant. First on to Taiwan for years, Haikui, which is interesting. It's just storm. I wonder that means any tropical storm. But first category plus typhoon into Taiwan since 2016, which is obviously the Nepal attack, and the other one, west on striking Hong Kong as Haikui at 632 millimeters, which was the tropical cyclone, I think, which was paralleling, but 632 millimeters is still a very significant rainfall, which was nonetheless expected. But Percassen retires Ege and Goring, replaced by Emil and Gavina. But actually, that lends a question. I mean, Ege and Goring, definitely the two main tropical cyclones that should have got retired. But yeah, I mean, good season overall. I try to keep this one a little bit longer because obviously the requests and everything. Try to explain it. Also, Mike and my perspectives. Just overall. But we'll see you next season.